Bore da pawb. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to My Wild Welsh Garden. My name's Isabel and I live here at the top of the Swansea Valley, and I'm wilding my garden and I'm trying to make it better for wildlife. Well, I normally talk to you either in the garden or in the summer house, but I've relocated into my kitchen this morning because, well, partly it's not very nice weather and partly because I'm going to do the RSPB Great British Garden Birdwatch. I think that's what it is, or maybe there's too many words in that. But anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend an hour sitting here with my coffee, watching the birds, and I'm going to count the number of species that I see, and I'm going to count the number of the maximum number of each species. So that's where I sit, next to the boiler, and there's my coffee and binoculars, and that's what I can see out of the side window, and then there's the garden through the door and the window over the sink. But before we start, I just wanted to say that quite a few people have sort of complimented me on my photography skills, and I don't have any, I have to say. It's absolutely nothing to do with me. I just take videos. I just do the videos on my phone, and I've got an old second-hand Android phone, and it takes photographs and it takes videos. So I literally point the phone and, press the record button. That's all I do. So most of the videos are taken on my phone, but the close-ups of the birds on the floor and in the bird bath, that's all done by the trail cam. And again, literally, I just set it up, point it in the right direction. And often it's not pointed in the right direction and it doesn't actually take photographs of anything. And it has a little sort of disc in there that I take out and put into the computer and download the photographs that way. And sometimes, people with YouTube channels are like professional photographers and filmmakers, and they've done training, and I've never done anything like that. I mean, before I had a phone, I had a camera, but we just used to take snaps of the children and holidays and stuff. So I suppose the lesson here is that anybody can have a YouTube channel photographing the wildlife in their garden. So I've set the timer for an hour and off we go. Okay, so while I'm counting these birds, I thought I'd just ask you about whether you think we're doing more harm than good in feeding our birds. Because those of you who are familiar with the RSPB and their shop will know that they've stopped selling feeders with flat surfaces. So they've stopped selling bird tables and feeders with trays and window feeders. And this is because they think that these feeders with flat surfaces are spreading the disease. Well, according to the British Trust for Ornithology, who have done quite a bit of research into the health of garden birds, they think that this horrible disease, trichomoniasis, which is a parasite and which is particularly affects finches like chaffinches and goldfinches and greenfinches, and is responsible for the decline in chaffinches and greenfinches over the last 10 to 20 years. They think that this is transmitted by the saliva of birds. So if the saliva of birds comes into contact with food, it contaminates it. So basically what's happening is when the food is on a flat surface, birds are sort of dribbling onto it and the food is becoming contaminated. And if the bird's infected, then a non-infected bird which picks up that seed then becomes infected and the disease is passed on. And so this has alarmed the RSPB to such an extent that they've withdrawn the sale of these products, and they're sort of reviewing the evidence, I guess, and the kind of advice that they give. And yeah, so I don't know whether they'll start selling them again or what. And, most people have got bird tables, so there's an awful lot of bird tables out there that are still being used. Well, the RSPB are still selling hanging feeders, and they seem to think that that's still okay. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, but birds are such messy eaters, and they drop the food on the floor, and this is then picked up by the ground feeding birds. So, that's going to be a source of infection, isn't it? And then I have a sieve under my seed feeder. A lot of you have commented on it, and the thing is, I put it there to stop the food from falling onto the floor, really to stop encouraging rats. But what happens is that other little birds then sit in the sieve and eat the food, eat the seeds that the other birds have dropped. And if that's been contaminated, then they're going to get infected, aren't they? And I've shown you a little film of the bullfinches sitting in the sieve. I don't want to kill my bullfinches because they're so beautiful and so rare. Both the RSPB and the British Trust for Ornithology recommend that you keep your bird feeders clean. That's one of the best ways of reducing transmission of this horrible disease. So they say, clean your feeders as often as you can, really. I have two of each kind of feeder. So every week I fill up a new feeder and I dump the old one into a bucket of soapy water and leave it there for an hour or so, and then scrub it out and put it in the greenhouse to dry so that it's all ready the following week to be filled up. And the flat bit of the bird table I clean every morning. I sluice it over with hot soapy water and rinse it off and then put the food on there. And both the RSPB and the BTO say that if you do see a diseased bird in your garden, then you should stop feeding for a couple of weeks. And this is because obviously disease is passed round wherever birds congregate. And so if you're not feeding them, they're not going to congregate in your garden. They're going to be dispersed over a larger area. And so the risk of infection is less. And another drawback that I've heard about bird feeding is that it kind of skews populations in favour of those birds that visit bird tables. And I've heard this about blue tits and willow tits. So blue tits come to bird tables and willow tits don't. So at the end of the winter, there's more blue tits because they've survived the winter better and they're sort of healthier and stronger. And blue tits and willow tits nest in similar situations. So when they're looking for nesting sites, the blue tits outcompete the willow tits because there's more of them and they're bigger and healthier. And so they get the best nesting sites, and that gives them the best chance of raising, big healthy broods. So you end up with more blue tits and fewer willow tits. And I absolutely love blue tits. I love to see them flitting around the garden and visiting the bird feeders. But I also love willow tits, and I wouldn't like to think that I was sort of favouring one over the other, really. So, yeah, I don't know what to sort of do or think about that. And, yeah, if you have any thoughts, put them in the comments, please. And as well as putting food on the bird table and into the bird feeders, I also scatter food on the ground. So what I do is I stand at the bottom of the steps and I chuck a couple of handfuls of sultanas up onto the lawn for the blackbirds, and then on the lawn and on the flower beds and on the path, so I can see them from my kitchen, from where I sit in my kitchen, I scatter handfuls of sunflower seeds, mealworms, and those little sort of suet pellety things. But I suppose the thing there is that the food is less concentrated, isn't it? It's sort of spread out, so there's less chance of an infected bird dribbling on the food and then a healthy bird picking it up. So I'd love to know what you think about this, whether you'd heard about what the RSPB were doing or not, or whether you've stopped using your bird tables or your flat feeders, or whether you're still using them. So yeah, please let me know in the comments. Yeah, I'd be very interested to hear from you. So I don't want to do more harm than good in feeding the birds. I think that's the bottom line. But there's plenty of research to show that it's really good to feed the birds, mainly because there's just not enough wild food for them, particularly in towns and cities. And feeding the birds does increase their survivability and does help the bird populations. So it's a good thing for the birds to be fed, obviously, but it's also really good for people. There's a lot of research that shows that feeding birds and watching birds, having birds in your garden is really beneficial for our mental health, and it certainly is for mine. I get such a lot of pleasure from watching the birds, and they really cheer me up. And to be honest, sometimes they get me up in the morning because, you know, I feel very low and I think, well, come on, you know, you've got a garden full of hungry birds. You've got to get out of bed. You've got to give them their breakfast. Okay, so the alarm's gone off. So I've been watching and counting the birds for an hour, and these are my results. The numbers in the circles are this year's numbers, and the ones next to them are last year's. So I had 14 species: robin, blackbird, coal tit, great tit, blue tit, dunnock, house sparrow, starling, magpie, collared dove, pied wagtail, siskin, chaffinch and song thrush. There were some DNAs. I used to say that at work. DNA did not attend. So yes, who didn't turn up? The bullfinches didn't turn up, and the grey wagtail didn't, and neither did the nuthatch, and neither did the long-tailed tits. But this year I had a magpie that I didn't have last year, and this year I had siskins, a pair of siskins that I didn't have last year, and I didn't see the song thrush last year. But numbers are very similar, so yeah, quite a good morning for the birds, despite the bad weather. And look who turned up when the count was finished. This is my friend, the grey wagtail, who lives down on the river. Well, because we've had such a lot of rain, the river's running really high this morning, so it's no wonder he's come up to the garden to find some food. It's just that he was a bit late and didn't arrive in time for the count. So that's it for the Great British Garden Birdwatch 2025. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you took part yourselves, hope you had a good time counting the birds in your garden and you had lots of nice birds to count and to see. So thanks for joining me in my Wild Welsh Garden again, and please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and you're interested in what I'm doing here to improve my garden for wildlife, or you're interested in trying to do the same in your garden. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye! Hwyl fawr!